It is now Donald Trump's world, and some might say Elon Musk's as well, and we're all just watching. What is the impact of the Trump presidency? What does it mean for the United States of America, for geopolitics, and in particular for India's interests? I'm Barkha Dutt, you're with the Mojo Story. Our focus today is on the Trump presidency. Every day, Donald Trump has been grabbing headlines and global attentions as he puts together his administration with one contentious choice after the other. Now, there are many in India rooting for him, others are wary. What might a Trump presidency mean for India, but also what might it mean for the world? Joining me now is our newsmaker today. Ian Bremmer is with us. Ian Bremmer is, of course, one of the world's most influential political scientists, global thinkers, and public intellectuals. Thank you, Ian. It's always a pleasure. I just finished reading your extraordinarily interesting newsletter. And one of the things that you said in it was that the United States democracy is in crisis, but the US is not on the verge of a civil war or a dictatorship. When you say democracy is in crisis in the US, how do you define it?
I mean that its institutions are under attack. The checks and balances that allow for rule of law in the US political system no longer function the way they were intended by the founders. We see Trump, who has appointed a significant number of people that are very interested in further breaking the existing institutions, bending them to his will, but not very capable of rebuilding them. And so in that regard, I think the question of what kind of power Trump over 4 years is going to be able to amass for himself and institutionalize that by weaponizing various parts of the US government and outside the US government. So the Department of Justice, the FBI, the IRS, intelligence agencies, and also, mainstream media, universities, places that educate and help to ensure that Americans have an integrated civic culture and a unified understanding of what's happening in their country, what's happening around them. All of those things are presently under attack. Again, the US is not on the precipice of civil war. You're seeing that Biden met with Trump. It was a fairly affable meeting in the White House. There will be a free and fair transfer of power. The elections were considered to be legitimate by the population. Kamala Harris, of course, in very short order, the day after the results, conceded. So that is not a challenge. But the idea that the U.S. is by far the least functional democracy among the advanced industrial economies in the world, that is very clear today. And that the U.S. might end up being the most powerful country in the world, but with a political system more alike Hungary or Turkey. I think that appears to be increasingly where the country is headed.
Well, that's a big statement to say that the US is among the least functional democracies among the major industrialized nations of the world. Let me ask you this. The appointments that Trump has made are attracting a lot of attention, in particular Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy. I think you had a funny tweet. Can still be called tweet. I don't know what it's called in the age of Musk. You had a funny tweet on that, talking about two people being tasked to run government efficiency. But really, the role of Musk in this administration, let's start there.
Well, Trump has recency bias. He spends a lot of time with people that he has gotten to know and impressed him in the most recent time. So very few appointments from his first administration, and yet he's spending enormous amount of time with Elon Musk. I mean, basically almost nonstop in the couple of weeks since the election. That does give Trump a lot of influence over the people that are being appointed in these positions. But that doesn't mean that will be true in 3 months or in 6 months' time. I will say that Trump's and Vivek's appointments to run this non-governmental organization, it is not a cabinet, it is not a department, it has no power. It's going to be stood up for 18 months, the Department of Governmental Efficiency. Elon says that he can take $2 trillion out of the US budget, create efficiency. That is not true. He can't do anything remotely close to that. Congress has no interest in allowing him to do that. Trump's own electoral promises, campaign promises, were all about spending more money and reducing tax burdens. So, and there's nobody in the House or Senate, with the exception of Rand Paul from Kentucky, who is really trying to bring down the deficit. So I think this is the announcement of Musk and Ramaswamy, red meat to the base, showing them I'm taking these two people you love and I'm giving them, important positions, but they will be able to accomplish virtually nothing in those roles. So the more interesting question about Musk is what kind of direct influence he will have outside of the political system. We saw, for example, that he was on the first Trump phone call as president with Volodymyr Zelensky from Ukraine. Musk, very important on Ukraine because he's providing Starlink, which has helped keep the Ukrainians in power, allow them to defend themselves and communicate. But of course, more recently, Musk has been parroting Russian disinformation and talking points on how to end the war, and has made fun of Zelensky publicly and undermined his position. So that could have a lot of influence in how the war ends. Musk, unlike Trump's national security appointments, who are overwhelmingly hawkish on China, Musk has a significant piece of his global wealth tied up in China, actively doing business in China, and is much more, I would say, complimentary of China than he is of the Ukrainians or even of the SEC in the United States. So, I mean, if Trump's first phone call with Xi Jinping includes Elon Musk, well, then I would probably have a more constructive view of what U.S.-China relations are likely to look like under a Trump administration. So those things, Barkha, I think are actually very interesting.
Well, I was just going to ask you that because your newsletter talks about the Trump administration being an administration of China hawks. But this isn't the first time that you're pointing out to the links between Elon Musk and China, Elon's wealth and projects linked to China. Isn't that a contradiction, or do you think it reinforces that Musk's influence might be more symbolic, more for the base than actual, or do we not know yet?
We don't know. We don't look. I mean, Trump has a desire to end the war in Ukraine as fast as possible, and he's appointed some people like Pete Hegseth for defense and Mike Waltz as national security advisor, who have been among the most hawkish in pro-Ukraine, anti-Russia sentiment and wanting to get them more military support, more economic support. Isn't that a contradiction? We don't know. And the reason we don't know is because we don't know how much attention Trump personally is going to spend on those policy issues at the high level and then in terms of detail. And if it turns out that he's not all that interested and it gets handed off to the officials that he has appointed in his cabinet, then Elon Musk is going to have very little influence on China. If, on the other hand, he's actually given a significant amount of attention to this personally, and is prepared to bring Elon in, then look, Elon does have a relationship with a number of high-level Chinese officials. He's traveled to China recently. He has held himself out there as the guy that can help smooth relations between China and Trump, so much so that when I was in Beijing, high-level officials were asking me, hey, do you think he can really do this? And what does it mean? And, should we count on him going forward? And the answer is that is a completely untested proposition. Barkha, I think there are two things that are interesting here on China specifically. One is that in Trump's first term, Trump did not have a technology policy. He wasn't interested in it. So he put tariffs on China. He was concerned about intellectual property. A lot of people, had a hard line on Taiwan. But on technology, it was Biden. It was the CHIPS Act came under Biden. It was the export controls on semiconductors came under Biden. Biosecure Act, Biden. So, I mean, are we going to see Trump continuing those policies, or will Elon have a lot more influence over technology policy vis-a-vis China? We know that Jeff Yass, who's a major investor for TikTok and also a major contributor to the Trump campaign, managed to get Trump to flip, not to want to ban TikTok, but instead saying, no, I want to keep working with TikTok, which is, kind of funny for a guy that's got a hawkish administration on China. I mean, China owns TikTok, and aren't you concerned about them scooping up all of this data, on American kids? For example, well, apparently no. Well, Elon's given a lot more money to the Trump campaign than Jeff Yass. I mean, $125 million as opposed to like $2 million. So, I mean, historically, one thing you could always count on Trump is the fact that if you gave him a lot of money, he would do what you wanted, right? I mean, he is very deeply oriented towards money and business transactions. So, I mean, surely you have to believe that Elon's contributions, and which have included algorithmic contributions on Twitter, that those should be valued by the president-elect. And the question is whether that will be valued primarily at home in terms of, continued subsidies for SpaceX and things like that, or whether it will have a meaningful implication for international policy, like, for example, on China. Again, we don't have any answers to those questions at this point.
So Elon is quite literally and metaphorically the X factor.
I think that's right.
Some other appointments. Tulsi Gabbard, Kash Patel, we pronounce it differently here in India. Those are two appointments that have, triggered a lot of interest, especially here in India. How do you look at those two appointments?
Kash Patel, as of this morning, I had not yet seen him appointed.
Well, yes. Sorry, I should say that he was rumored to have a significant role.
Yes,
Tulsi Gabbard has been
right.
appointed. I should correct myself.
I actually personally expect that he will be the FBI nominee. And Tulsi Gabbard for National Intelligence Director, Matt Gaetz for Attorney General, and then Pete Hegseth for Defense. Those are the four appointees that I would say are considered the biggest threat to vulnerable and weaker U.S. institutions, balance of power, extremely loyal to Trump and willing to do things that could undermine democracy and democratic functioning in the U.S. Now, I have different views on these people. For example, I think that Tulsi Gabbard is certainly one of the biggest promoters of the viewpoints of adversaries of the United States geopolitically, Syria, Russia, most notably, also Iran. And that's making a lot of people very upset. But I've seen a lot of well-respected Democrats claim that she's, a cutout for Russian intelligence, that she's actually been, on the payroll of actively working for the Russians. There is no evidence of that. I have no reason to believe that. I think that she is more akin to someone like Jeffrey Sachs, someone like John Mearsheimer, people that have, for various reasons, decided that they are against the so-called deep state, strongly against what they consider to be American imperialism, and aligning with American enemies. And in this regard, Tulsi Gabbard is ideologically 180 degrees opposed to the policy and worldviews of the incoming Secretary of State Marco Rubio, of the incoming National Security Advisor Mike Waltz. Now, she will have influence over U.S. intelligence, but she will not be the sole person that has that influence. The director of the CIA will be more important, for example. It just means that ultimately there's going to be a lot of infighting to the extent that policies are up for grabs among that group. And I expect that one or more of those people, those four, will not be in power within 12 months. because you can't maintain that kind of opposition functionally inside your government. Now, Matt Gaetz and Kash Patel, if he gets his FBI appointment, that's a different story, because those are people that are prepared to facilitate Trump going after his adversaries. And this is very different, Barkha, from Trump's first term. Trump's first term, he wasn't really, looking at an enemies list and saying, these people tried to hurt me, I have to hurt them. This time he is. Trump, if he didn't get elected, was going to go to jail. He believes that the investigations against him were politicized, were weaponized, and illegal, not only by the FBI and the Attorney General, but by the president and his allies in the Democratic Party. He believes that them calling him Hitler and a fascist made him vulnerable to assassination attacks, and that they refused to give him adequate Secret Service security that made it very likely that he was going to get killed and this close, right? So, I mean, clearly he feels like he needs to address that, and he wants to use these agencies to go after these people. And he is now appointing people that are prepared to facilitate that. So if Gaetz is confirmed, or if there is a recess nomination, which would allow him to be in place for almost 2 years, then I do believe that he and Kash would create a new McCarthyism in the United States, where a group of people that Trump considers to be enemies, and how big this group is to be seen, would absolutely face investigations, audits, possibly criminal charges. And again, we haven't seen that in the United States since the Red Scare days, something that really would cause a chilling impact on rule of law in the United States.
Now, quickly on geopolitics, your newsletter's overview is China, hawkish on China, embrace of Israel, and you say Putin is the real winner. That's just what your newsletter said moments ago.
Yeah.
Why do you think Putin is the real winner?
Well, because Trump is prepared to undermine the Ukrainians to ensure that he has an end to the war. And I think that Russians will consider that, on balance, favorable to them, even if it does not give them everything they want in the war. But more broadly, I think one of the interesting things to consider here is that for 40 years now, the United States has been trying to get China to be more like the Americans on the global stage. So adhere to rule of law, promote multilateralism in US-led institutions, and act as a responsible stakeholder. It turns out that the Americans are actually becoming much more like the Chinese, transactional in foreign policy, primarily unilateral vis-a-vis other countries, uninterested in the promotion of values or aligning with other countries that have values that are like the United States. And that is, in my view, a much more dangerous global order, an order that will be considered much more problematic for other countries around the world. It certainly will be problematic for the 8 billion, soon to be 10 billion people in the world that need responsible stakeholdership, need leaders that care not only about their narrow political tribes, but care about other people around the world. And, I think what we have seen from a Trump administration and what we've seen from the Chinese is a great deal of indifference to other people around the world. Not my problem, right? And yet the challenges are increasingly global. So, the fact that you have all of these issues, like dangerous weapons proliferation and cyber insecurity and growing radicalism and terrorism, illegal immigration is increasing, climate change, of course, as well as artificial intelligence. These are all global challenges. They transcend borders. They will not be fixed by national policies. And yet the willingness of the world's two top leaders to play any role in global governance is being decisively rejected by the leaders of these two countries, I think that is a really big challenge.
Not to take more of your time, for India, the point has been made about institutional sort of closeness. Many Indians believe the Republicans have been better for India than Democrats, but Trump is a whole new ball game. We don't know what he's going to do with tariffs, despite his good personal rapport with Prime Minister Modi. What do you think this means for the US-India relationship?
Well, I mean, India should care about a United States that wants to be a leader on climate change and transition energy, because the Indians have not industrialized yet, and your net zero plans are 2070 and aren't particularly in place, and you're going to need a lot of support, economic support, diplomatic support from countries like the US and China. Trump has just nominated for Secretary of Energy an oil executive, fracking executive, who says that climate change is not a real thing. It's not a structural concern. So, I mean, if I were leading India, I would be very concerned about that. If I were leading India, I would want an American leader that cares more about global governance, that's aligned more with the global South, of which India plays a leading role. So the bilateral relationship between the US and India will be very strong, but India will increasingly be operating in a world that is less hospitable for a country like India, for 1.5 billion people like the Indians, and the US will be increasingly responsible for the reason that is happening.
Yeah, well, a lot to think about, Ian. I know you're very busy, so we're going to let you go now. I'm going to look forward to your next newsletter because Trump's going to keep all of us very busy. Take care. See you soon. Bye. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.